After years of service in the Army, Mark Daniels lived a quiet and lonely life in a small wooden cabin outside a peaceful town. He had been a brave soldier once, a man who had seen danger up close, who had helped save people in the middle of war zones. But when the noise of battle ended, silence became his companion. The long nights were the hardest. Sometimes he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the moon rise over the trees, wondering why he had survived when so many of his brothers in arms had not. The only thing that kept him from falling into complete darkness was his loyal friend, a retired canine dog named Rex. Rex had been his partner during his last years in the service. Together they had trained for rescue missions, bomb detections, and survival in the harshest places. Rex was not just a dog to Mark. He was family. When Mark left the Army, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving Rex behind. The two came home together, both broken in different ways but still holding on. While Mark tried to heal from the memories that haunted him, Rex stayed close, sensing every emotion in his master's heart. The dog rarely barked without reason and followed Mark everywhere like a shadow. Every morning, Mark took Rex for a walk through the forest that surrounded his cabin. The air was cool and filled with the smell of pine. Birds sang softly, and the crunch of leaves under their boots and paws was the only sound. Mark found peace in these walks. It was their quiet time, a way for both of them to breathe and forget the noise of the past. Neighbors sometimes saw them and waved, calling out, "Morning, Mark." "Morning, Rex." He would smile back, raise his hand, and continue walking. He didn't talk much, but everyone respected him. People said, "That man's seen things." They didn't need to know what, they just felt it. One cold morning, as the fog rolled low across the ground, Mark noticed Rex acting a little different. The dog kept sniffing the air and pausing as if something caught his attention. Mark thought it might be a deer or a rabbit. Rex often got excited at animal scents. But this time it wasn't just curiosity. The dog's ears stood up, tail stiff, and his body became tense. Mark slowed his pace and watched him closely. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Rex gave a short bark and looked ahead into the dense trees. Mark could feel the change in the air. The same feeling he used to get right before something happened during missions, an instinct that danger or something important was near. Rex began to move faster, pulling on the leash. Mark tried to keep up, but Rex was strong. He tugged hard until Mark finally unclipped the leash and let him go. The dog sprinted ahead, nose to the ground, barking sharply every few seconds. Mark followed as fast as his legs could carry him. The forest grew thicker, and branches brushed against his jacket. His heart started to beat faster, not from fear, but from that deep soldier's instinct waking up again. He hadn't felt this rush in years. Rex never behaved like this unless there was something serious. "Rex, slow down, boy," Mark called out, but the dog didn't stop. He could hear Rex barking ahead, then a strange sound mixed with it, a faint, weak cry. At first, Mark thought he was imagining it, but when he stopped and listened carefully, he heard it again. A small voice, soft and broken, like someone calling for help. The sound made his stomach twist. He pushed through the bushes, his hands trembling slightly, and followed Rex's voice. The barks grew louder, urgent, desperate even, guiding him toward a clearing. When he reached the spot, Rex was standing near a fallen tree. The dog was whining now, pawing at a pile of leaves and branches. Mark rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside him. He began to move the branches aside, and that's when he saw her, a little girl lying motionless on the cold ground. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her face was pale, her lips slightly blue, and her tiny hands were scratched. She was wearing a thin jacket that was soaked and covered in dirt. For a moment, Mark froze. The sight hit him like a punch. He had seen injured children before in war zones, but seeing it again in the quiet of his own town made his heart ache. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" he asked softly, placing a hand near her face. Her eyes fluttered weakly. She tried to move her lips, but no words came out. Mark quickly checked her pulse, faint but there. She was alive, but barely. His mind started working fast, the way it used to during emergencies. He took off his thick army jacket and wrapped it around her small body, tucking it tight to keep her warm. "Hang in there, kiddo," he whispered. Rex lay down beside her, pressing his warm body close to hers. The dog looked up at Mark as if saying, "I'll keep her safe." Mark pulled out his phone and tried to call for help, but the signal was weak. The forest was too deep. The screen flashed no service. He cursed under his breath, panic rising inside him. He couldn't carry her all the way back alone. She needed medical help fast. He stroked Rex's head and said, "Stay here, buddy. Don't move. Keep her warm." Rex gave a low bark, his eyes fixed on the little girl as if he understood every word. Mark took one last look and then ran through the woods toward the main road, branches cutting against his arms. He shouted for help, hoping someone nearby could hear. After what felt like forever, he reached a spot where the trees opened up and his phone finally caught a signal. He quickly called emergency services, his voice shaking as he explained what happened. "It's a little girl. She's freezing, breathing weak. Near the old trail by Miller's Creek. Please hurry," he said. The operator promised help was on the way. Mark hung up and ran back as fast as his legs could carry him, his lungs burning with every breath. When he reached the clearing again, Rex was still there, lying protectively beside the girl. The dog hadn't moved an inch. Mark knelt down and saw that her breathing was shallow but steady. He gently brushed her hair away from her forehead and whispered, "You're gonna be okay, sweetheart. Just hold on." He could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance now, slowly getting closer. Relief washed over him. He looked at Rex and smiled through his exhaustion. "You found her, boy. You really found her." As he waited for help to arrive, Mark sat down beside them, his hand resting on Rex's back. The dog's fur was warm, his body steady. The little girl's hand twitched, trying to move toward Rex's paw. It was a tiny motion, but it made Mark's throat tighten. He realized that even though Rex was trained for missions, this wasn't just training. It was instinct, love, and loyalty. The same dog who had once saved soldiers on the battlefield had just saved a child in a quiet American forest. By the time the sound of the sirens grew louder, Mark felt tears sting his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not even when he buried friends. But this moment felt like something pure, something that reminded him that life still had meaning. When the rescue team arrived, he stood up, his legs shaking slightly. They asked him where the girl was, and he pointed to Rex, still lying beside her, guarding her like a soldier guarding his post. The paramedics rushed in with blankets and equipment, their faces shocked at the sight. One of them said, "If you hadn't found her now, she wouldn't have made it another hour." Mark looked at Rex, who wagged his tail just once and then sat quietly, eyes fixed on the girl. As the team lifted her onto a stretcher and carried her to the ambulance, Rex let out a soft whine, watching until she disappeared from sight. Mark placed his hand on the dog's head and whispered, "You did good, buddy. You did real good." For the first time in many years, he felt something deep inside his heart shift, like a heavy door opening after being locked for too long. The forest was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. That day, as Mark walked back home with Rex by his side, he knew something had changed forever. He didn't know who the little girl was or what had brought her to the woods, but he knew one thing for sure. Rex had once again answered the call of duty. The soldier in both of them had come alive once more. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the little girl all night. After the ambulance left, the quiet of the forest returned, but inside his mind the sounds of that day played again and again, the faint cry, the desperate barking, the cold touch of her hand. He sat on his porch with Rex at his feet staring at the stars. The night felt heavy. He had been through many dangerous moments in his life, but this one had touched something different inside him. This wasn't war. This was an innocent child's life. He wondered if she was still alive. He didn't even know her name. Rex lay beside him, his head resting on Mark's boot, calm but alert. From time to time, the dog lifted his head and looked toward the woods, his ears twitching as if listening to something only he could hear. Mark reached down and gently rubbed his fur. "You did good today, boy," he said softly. "Real good." Rex wagged his tail once and gave a low sigh, his eyes half closed. Morning came slowly with a pale sunlight spilling through the trees. Mark brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling his cabin. As he sipped it, he looked at Rex, who was already sitting near the door, waiting for his morning walk. Even after everything that had happened, the dog's routine never changed. Mark smiled and grabbed his jacket. "All right, partner," he said. "Let's go see what the forest looks like today." They walked the same trail as before. The forest was still, but something felt different. Mark noticed how the branches that had once covered the little girl's body were now cleared away. There were tire marks from the ambulance, footprints from the rescuers, and pieces of gauze left behind. The memory of her pale face made him stop and take a deep breath. "You found her here. he said quietly to Rex, kneeling beside him. Right here, he patted the dog's head. You really never stop being a hero, do you? Rex sniffed around the spot, circling it slowly. Then, without warning, he lifted his nose high into the air again, sniffing like he had done the day before. His tail straightened and he gave a low growl. Mark frowned, watching him closely. What is it now, buddy? He asked. Rex began to move again, this time toward the other side of the clearing where the trees were thicker and the ground dipped into a shallow stream. Mark followed, stepping carefully over the rocks. The air was colder near the water, and he could see mist rising from the surface. Rex crossed the stream and climbed up the muddy bank, nose pressed to the ground. His movements were sharp, focused like he was tracking something again. Mark's soldier instincts kicked in immediately. He scanned the area, listening. There was no sound except the soft rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. Rex, what are you picking up? He whispered. The dog didn't answer, of course, but he stopped suddenly and began to bark, short and firm. Mark walked faster, his boots slipping a little in the mud. When he reached Rex, he saw something lying under a bush, a small pink backpack half buried in dirt. Mark bent down and picked it up. It was muddy but still zipped closed. There were tiny stickers on it, flowers, hearts, and a smiling sun. His heart tightened. This must have belonged to the little girl. He carefully opened it. Inside were a few crayons, a water bottle, and a small stuffed bunny with one ear torn. The sight of it made his chest ache. So this is yours, huh, kid? He murmured. Rex sniffed the backpack and barked once as if confirming it. Mark looked around again. How did this get all the way over here? He wondered aloud. It didn't make sense. The rescue team must have missed it during the search. He decided to keep it safe and return it to the family once he found out where they were. Just then, Rex barked again, more urgently this time, and began running further into the forest. Mark grabbed the backpack and ran after him. The dog stopped at a large oak tree with roots curling out like claws. He was barking up the tree now, growling softly. Mark squinted and saw something shiny wedged between the branches, something metallic catching the morning light. He climbed carefully and reached for it. It was a small bracelet with colorful beads spelling out the name Lily. The name echoed in his mind. Lily, he whispered. So that's her name. He pocketed the bracelet gently, then looked down at Rex. Good boy. You found more than I ever expected. As they walked back toward the cabin, Mark's thoughts were filled with the little girl. Now he had her name, and he wanted to know what had happened to her. Back home, he turned on his old laptop and searched for Missing Girl Lily Forest Rescue. It didn't take long. The top news article read, Local girl found alive after missing overnight in cold woods. Credit goes to veteran and his K-9 partner. Mark clicked the story. There was her picture, smiling, bright-eyed with the same pink backpack in the background. The article said she was 7 years old, had wandered away from her family's campsite near Miller's Creek, and had been found just in time to save her life. Mark leaned back in his chair, relief flooding through him. You did it, Rex, he said with a smile. She's alive. Rex wagged his tail at the sound of his name. The article mentioned the family's gratitude and that the doctors were amazed she survived so long in the cold. Mark noticed the hospital name listed in the story, St. Mary's Regional Hospital. He decided right then that he would go see her. That afternoon, he and Rex drove to town. The hospital was small but busy. As soon as he entered the reception area, a nurse recognized him from the news. You're the man with the dog, she said, her eyes wide. Everyone's talking about you two. The little girl's family has been asking about you. Mark smiled awkwardly. I just did what anyone would do, he replied. Actually, Rex did all the work. The nurse led them to the children's ward. Through the glass window, Mark saw Lily lying in a hospital bed, her face pale but peaceful. Her parents sat beside her, holding her hands. When they noticed him, they quickly stood up and came out of the room. The mother's eyes were full of tears as she whispered, You saved our daughter. We don't even know how to thank you. The father shook his hand firmly. If it weren't for you and your dog, she wouldn't be here, he said, his voice trembling. Mark felt uncomfortable under the praise. Please, he said softly. Thank Rex. He's the real hero. The mother bent down and petted Rex, tears falling down her cheeks. Thank you, sweetheart, she said gently. You brought my little girl back to me. Rex wagged his tail and licked her hand as if he understood the weight of her words. The family told Mark that Lily was doing better but still weak. She had been found just in time before her body temperature dropped too low. The doctors called her survival a miracle. When Mark gave them the pink backpack and bracelet he found, the mother gasped and hugged them both tightly. "She never lets go of this bracelet," she whispered. "She's going to be so happy to see it again." As Mark and Rex left the hospital, the sky began to darken with evening clouds. He looked down at Rex and said, "You've done your duty again, partner." But deep down he had a strange feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Something about the way Rex had gone back to the woods that morning made him wonder if there was more to discover. Later that night, while he was cleaning Rex's food bowl, the phone rang. It was the same nurse from the hospital. Her voice sounded shaky but excited. "Mr. Daniels," she said quickly, "you might not believe this, but Lily woke up a few minutes ago." The first thing she said was, "Where's the dog who kept me warm?" She told us she felt something breathing beside her in the woods when she thought she was going to die. Mark froze, his eyes moving slowly toward Rex, who was lying quietly near the fireplace. "She remembers that?" he whispered. "She felt him there?" "Yes," the nurse replied softly. "She said she thought the dog's heartbeat helped her stay alive." When the call ended, Mark sat down beside Rex and stroked his fur. The dog looked up at him with calm eyes, tail wagging slowly. "You're more than a hero, Rex," he said in a hushed voice. "You're a miracle." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside the cabin there was peace. Mark didn't know it yet. But what happened next would touch not only his life but the whole town in a way he could never imagine. The morning after Mark received the call from the nurse, he barely slept. The words kept echoing in his mind. She said she felt something breathing beside her when she thought she was going to die. It wasn't just a random statement. It was something powerful, almost spiritual. He looked at Rex lying peacefully by the fireplace, unaware of how many lives he had already changed. Mark smiled softly and whispered, "Looks like you made quite an impression, buddy." Rex lifted his head, wagging his tail as if responding. Mark poured him a bowl of water and sat beside him on the wooden floor. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of firewood. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt a sense of warmth that went beyond the fire's glow, a feeling that maybe life was starting to mean something again. Later that day, the hospital called him again. This time, Lily's father wanted to speak to him personally. "Mr. Daniels," he said in a grateful but emotional voice, "my daughter woke up this morning and keeps asking to see you and your dog. She remembers everything, the forest, the cold, and Rex lying next to her. Could you come by? It would mean the world to her." Mark looked at Rex, who was sitting attentively as if he could hear the whole conversation. "Of course," he said softly. "We'll come right away." He got dressed, brushed Rex's fur, and packed a few of his favorite dog treats. The drive to the hospital was quiet. The small town roads were lined with autumn trees shedding orange and brown leaves. As Mark drove, his thoughts wandered. He had rescued people before, but it had always been under orders. Missions, assignments, duty. This was different. This was personal. When they arrived, the nurse greeted them with a wide smile. "She's been waiting for you all morning," she said. As they walked down the hallway, people stopped to look. Some smiled and whispered, "That's the veteran and his dog." One of the doctors even came forward to shake Mark's hand. "You did something incredible, sir," he said kindly. "She wouldn't have survived another hour." Mark only nodded. "It wasn't me," he said, glancing down at Rex. "It was him." When they reached Lily's room, her parents stood by the window. Lily was sitting up in bed, her cheeks still pale but her eyes bright with excitement. The moment she saw Rex, she gasped and clapped her hands. "That's him!" "That's the dog from the woods," she said, her voice filled with joy. Rex wagged his tail and walked straight to her bedside, resting his head gently on the blanket. The girl reached out with her small hands and touched his fur. "You came back," she whispered softly. Her parents exchanged emotional looks. Mark smiled gently, feeling his throat tighten. "He missed you," he said, his voice low and kind. Lily's mother placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Honey, tell them what you told us," she said. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. "When I was lying in the forest, I was really scared," she said. "I couldn't move. I thought I was going to fall asleep forever. But then I felt something warm next to me. It was Rex. I remember hearing his heart beating. It made me feel safe. Tears filled the mother's eyes as she listened. Mark looked at Rex and then at Lily. "He stayed with you the whole time," he said softly. "He wouldn't leave until help came." The doctor standing nearby smiled gently. "You know," he said to Mark, "when the ambulance brought her in, she stopped breathing for a short moment. One of the medics said your dog pushed against her chest just before her heart started again. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something else. But whatever it was, it saved her life." Mark's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Rex in amazement. "You did that, didn't you, buddy?" Rex wagged his tail and gave a small bark as if confirming it. Everyone in the room laughed softly through their tears. The family invited Mark and Rex to stay a while. They shared hot cocoa from the cafeteria and talked about the night Lily went missing. Her father explained that they had been camping near the woods when Lily wandered off chasing fireflies. "We searched everywhere," he said quietly, guilt filling his voice. "We called her name until morning. When the police said they were sending search teams, I thought I had lost her forever. And then I got the call that she'd been found alive by a veteran and his rescue dog. I couldn't believe it." Mark listened silently, his eyes on Lily as she stroked Rex's fur. He could see how attached she had become to him already. Every few minutes she whispered something to the dog, and Rex just watched her, calm and loyal. It reminded Mark of the way Rex used to comfort soldiers after hard missions. Somehow this dog always knew how to heal hearts, not just find bodies or detect danger, but bring peace. Before they left, Lily's mother handed Mark an envelope. "Please accept this," she said. "It's not much, but we want to do something for you." Mark immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said firmly but kindly. "We don't take rewards for doing what's right. You keep that for her." She insisted, but Mark simply smiled. "If you really want to thank me," he said, "take good care of her, and maybe let her visit Rex once in a while." The family agreed happily. They hugged him before he left, and Lily whispered, "Bye, Rex, I'll see you soon." That evening, Mark and Rex returned home. The air outside was cool and smelled like rain. Mark sat by the fire again, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized how much one small act could change lives. Saving that little girl had also saved a part of himself he thought was gone. The soldier in him, the protector, it was still there. The next few days passed quietly until the local newspaper called. A young reporter wanted to write about the story. At first, Mark didn't want attention, but when she mentioned that it might help raise awareness for search and rescue training, he agreed. The article was published a few days later with the headline, "War Veteran and His Dog Save Missing Girl, a Story of Courage, Loyalty, and Hope." The story spread quickly. Soon, people from nearby towns came to visit or send letters thanking Mark and Rex. Children drew pictures of the heroic dog, and families sent handmade treats for him. Someone even left a sign outside Mark's gate that read, "Heroes live here." Mark didn't know how to feel about it, but Rex seemed to enjoy the attention. Every visitor who came by got a gentle wag of his tail. One afternoon, Mark received a call from the local sheriff. "We'd like to honor Rex at the town hall next week," the sheriff said. "It's not just about saving the girl. It's about reminding people what true loyalty looks like." Mark hesitated but finally agreed. The following week, the entire town gathered. Children waved small flags and local officers stood in a line of salute. When Mark and Rex stepped onto the stage, the applause was so loud it echoed through the square. Mark gave a short speech, simple and sincere. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I just followed my dog. He's the one who led me. Sometimes the purest heart belongs to those who don't speak our language, but still understand us better than anyone." Rex received a medal with his name engraved on it. The crowd cheered, and Mark could see tears in the eyes of many parents holding their children close. For him, it wasn't about medals or news stories. It was about something deeper. He realized that Rex hadn't just saved Lily. He had brought hope back to a whole community. That night, when they returned to their cabin, Mark hung the medal above the fireplace. He looked down at Rex, who was already curled up on the rug. "You've done more good in this world than most people ever will," he said softly. "You gave a family back their daughter. You gave me back my purpose." Rex opened one eye, wagged his tail lazily, and gave a quiet huff before falling asleep again. Mark smiled and leaned back in his chair. The forest outside was calm, and for once so was his heart. But little did he know the story wasn't over yet. Something even more unbelievable was about to happen. something that would make him question whether fate had brought him and Rex together for a reason far greater than either of them could imagine. The week after the town celebration felt peaceful for Mark and Rex. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but something inside Mark had changed. He was no longer just a lonely veteran living on the edge of town. People now waved at him when he walked down the street. Children ran up to pet Rex, calling him the hero dog. For years, Mark had avoided people, hiding behind silence and memories, but now he found himself smiling again. It felt strange but good. One morning, as Mark sat outside sipping his coffee, a car stopped in front of his cabin. The door opened, and Lily's parents stepped out holding a basket filled with cookies and flowers. Lily followed behind them, wearing a red sweater and a bright smile. The moment she saw Rex, she ran to him, laughing as the big dog wagged his tail and circled her with joy. Mark couldn't help but smile as he watched them. "Hope we're not bothering you," Lily's father said kindly. Lily wanted to visit her friend. "You're always welcome here," Mark replied, standing up to shake his hand. They sat together on the porch, sipping tea and sharing stories. Lily's mother said softly, "The doctors still can't believe she survived that night. Her temperature was so low that they said another half hour could have been fatal. But somehow she held on." She looked down at Rex and smiled. "I think we all know why." Lily sat beside Rex, brushing his fur. "I wasn't scared when he was there," she said in her small, clear voice. "I could feel his heartbeat. It made me feel like I wasn't alone." Mark watched her quietly. He could see that the bond between her and Rex was something special. It wasn't just a moment in the woods, and it was something deeper, something unexplainable. He remembered what the doctor had said, that Rex had nudged her chest right before her heart started again. At the time, it had sounded like a coincidence, but now he wasn't so sure. That evening, after Lily and her parents left, Mark sat by the fireplace. The flames danced gently, filling the cabin with soft light. Rex lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws. Mark's thoughts drifted back to his time in service. He remembered the missions, the danger, and the countless times Rex had saved him and others. The dog had once found survivors buried under rubble, guided search teams through storms, and even pulled wounded soldiers to safety. Rex's instincts had always been beyond ordinary. But what happened with Lily? It felt different. It wasn't just skill. It felt like something guided Rex that day, something beyond training. A few days later, Mark received a letter from the hospital. It was from one of the nurses who had cared for Lily. Inside was a simple note. When she was recovering, she told us she saw a bright light in the woods. She said a man in uniform told her to wait because help was coming. "We thought you should know." Mark read the note again and again. A man in uniform? That made no sense. He hadn't seen anyone else in the forest that day. He looked down at Rex, who was watching him quietly. "You think she was dreaming, boy?" he asked softly. But a strange chill ran through him. Could it be one of his old team members? Someone who never made it back? He shook his head, trying to brush away the thought. Still, deep inside, he couldn't stop wondering. The next morning, Mark decided to take Rex back to the place where they had found Lily. The forest was quiet, the air crisp and cool. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, painting golden patches on the ground. Rex walked beside him, sniffing the air calmly. When they reached the clearing, Mark stopped and stood in silence. The memory came rushing back. The pale face of the little girl, the weak cry, the feeling of racing against time. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Feels different now," he said quietly. "Peaceful." Rex sniffed around and then stopped near the same fallen tree where they had first found her. He stood still for a long time, tail wagging slowly, his eyes fixed on the spot. Mark walked closer and noticed a few wildflowers growing there. Small white blossoms, fresh and new. He knelt down and touched one gently. It was strange. Flowers didn't usually grow that fast in this cold weather. He smiled faintly. "You're something else, aren't you, Rex?" They stayed there for a while before heading back. That night, Mark received another phone call. It was Lily's mother again, her voice filled with emotion. "Mark," she said softly, "you won't believe what happened today." Lily was drawing pictures in her sketchbook, and she showed me one that gave me chills. She drew Rex lying beside her in the woods, and behind him, there's a man in a soldier's uniform watching over them. She said he was smiling. Mark's heart stopped for a second. "Did she say who he was?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She said she didn't know, the mother replied, but she said he looked a lot like you when you were younger. For a long time after the call, Mark just sat there staring into the fire. The crackling wood filled the silence, but his mind was loud with memories, faces of soldiers he had lost, voices that had faded over the years. Could one of them have been watching over her? Or was it just the imagination of a little girl who had been through too much? A few days later, the local news wanted to film a short segment about Rex for a TV show that honored real-life heroes. Mark agreed, though he didn't like the attention. The crew came to his cabin, filming him and Rex walking through the forest, and they even visited the hospital to include Lily's story. When the segment aired, the town gathered in a community hall to watch. There was laughter, clapping, and even tears. People cheered when they saw Rex on screen. After the show ended, a quiet moment filled the hall. Then an older man approached Mark. He wore a veteran's cap and carried a cane. "I served with your unit once, years back," the man said softly. "I knew your team leader, Captain Harris. He always said if anything ever happened to him, he'd keep watching over his men." The man smiled gently. Maybe he kept that promise. Mark didn't say a word, but something inside him stirred. A deep, comforting feeling, as if all the strange pieces of the story were finally connecting. Maybe the man Lily saw wasn't just a dream. Maybe some bonds, like the one between soldiers or between a man and his dog, never really end. That night, Mark stood outside with Rex beside him. The stars stretched endlessly above, shining brighter than usual. "Maybe we had help that day," he said quietly. "Maybe someone up there wasn't ready to let her go." Rex tilted his head, then rested it against Mark's leg. They stood there for a long time, man and dog, both silent under the stars. As the days went on, Lily continued to recover. Her family often visited Mark's cabin, bringing homemade pies or drawings for Rex. Each visit filled the place with laughter and warmth that had been missing for years. Mark's cabin, once quiet and lonely, became a place where people gathered, where stories of courage, love, and loyalty were shared. But what happened next truly amazed everyone. A few months later, Lily's family invited Mark and Rex to her school assembly. When they arrived, the principal announced they had a surprise. Lily walked onto the stage holding Rex's medal in her small hands. "This belongs to my best friend," she said proudly. "He didn't just save my life. He made me brave again." Then she turned to Mark. "And this man taught me that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear boots." The crowd erupted in applause. Mark's eyes filled with tears, and even Rex wagged his tail as if understanding every word. That day, Mark realized that what they had done wasn't just a rescue. It was a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change the course of someone's life. Sometimes fate doesn't need grand miracles. It just needs a man, a loyal dog, and a moment of courage. As they left the school that afternoon, Lily ran ahead and hugged Rex tightly. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. "I'll never forget you." Mark smiled, the sun warm on his face, and whispered to himself, "Neither will I." The months passed quietly, and the little town slowly moved on from the news headlines. But for Mark Daniels, life had found a new meaning. Before the rescue, he had been a man living in silence, carrying memories of war that never seemed to fade. Now, each day had something to look forward to. Visits from Lily's family, walks with Rex that ended with laughter instead of loneliness, and letters from strangers thanking him for reminding them that hope still existed in the world. Rex had become something of a local celebrity. Children at the park ran toward him every morning, calling his name and giving him treats. He was patient with everyone, his calm nature shining through. Mark often watched in quiet pride as Rex sat surrounded by kids, wagging his tail gently while they petted him. It was a sight that made the old soldier's heart soften every time. One morning, while Mark was cleaning Rex's collar, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope had a golden seal from the State Rescue Association. Inside was an invitation. They wanted to honor both Mark and Rex at a state ceremony for extraordinary acts of courage and service. Mark stared at the letter for a long time, unsure what to think. He wasn't used to attention or awards. But he looked down at Rex, who tilted his head as if waiting for a decision. "What do you say, partner?" Mark asked with a small grin. "Should we go make the folks proud again?" Rex barked once, as if to say yes. The ceremony was held 2 weeks later in a grand hall filled with veterans, officers, and families. When Mark and Rex stepped onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet. The applause felt endless. The governor himself placed a medal around Rex's neck, a shining gold star that read, "For bravery beyond measure." Cameras flashed, people clapped, and even tough-looking soldiers wiped tears from their eyes. Mark spoke briefly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I didn't save that girl," he said humbly. "My dog did." He reminded me what loyalty truly means. To stand by those who need you, even when no one is watching. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Mark what had kept him going through all these years of silence after the war. He smiled faintly and said, "I guess I was waiting for a reason to believe again. Turns out that reason had 4 legs and a big heart." His words touched everyone there. The story spread far beyond their small town, reaching newspapers and TV channels across the country. A few days later, Lily's family came to visit again. They brought cookies, framed photos, and a drawing Lily had made. It showed Rex standing in the woods beside her with light shining through the trees. In the background was the faint image of a man in uniform smiling over them. Lily had drawn it with soft colors, almost dreamlike. She handed it to Mark and said, "I remember that light. I wasn't scared because I felt like someone was with us." Mark looked at the picture quietly. He could still recall the nurse's letter about the same vision. He smiled softly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you weren't alone," he said. "Maybe someone was watching over you." Lily grinned and nodded. "I think he was watching over Rex too." Mark hung the drawing above the fireplace. Every time he looked at it, something stirred in his heart, a mix of pride, peace, and mystery. He didn't try to explain it anymore. Some things in life weren't meant to be explained, only felt. As winter came, the days grew shorter. Snow began to blanket the ground around Mark's cabin. He and Rex would take long walks through the woods, their footprints leaving twin trails behind them. Sometimes they stopped near the place where they'd found Lily. Mark had placed a small wooden cross there with her name carved on it, not as a memorial, but as a symbol of hope. It reminded him of the day courage met fate and changed everything. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark noticed Lily's family's car pulling up the dirt road again. He stepped out onto the porch, smiling as they got out, carrying blankets and thermoses of hot cocoa. "We thought we'd spend Christmas Eve with you and Rex," Lily's father said warmly. Mark's cabin filled with laughter and the smell of hot cocoa. Lily played with Rex near the fireplace, tossing him a small rubber ball while her parents and Mark talked about life, family, and the small joys that make hard days worth living. The night felt special, simple yet full of meaning. At one point, Lily sat beside Mark and asked, "Do you ever miss being a soldier?" He looked at her for a moment, thinking carefully. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but I think I found a new kind of mission now." "What mission?" she asked curiously. "To make sure good never gets forgotten," he said, smiling gently, "and to remind people that courage doesn't end when the fight does." Lily nodded, as if understanding something far beyond her years. Then she reached into her small bag and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this for Rex," she said proudly. Mark helped her unwrap it. Inside was a small handmade tag with painted letters that said, "Guardian of Hearts." Mark felt his eyes grow misty. He fastened it gently onto Rex's collar. "That's perfect," he said softly, "because that's exactly what he is." The snow continued to fall outside, wrapping the forest in quiet beauty. Later that night, after Lily and her family left, Mark sat on the porch with Rex at his feet. He looked at the stars shining above the dark treetops and whispered, "You did good, old friend." The next morning, something happened that would stay in Mark's heart forever. He was standing in his kitchen when there was a knock at the door. It was Lily and her father again, holding a small box. "This came for you," her father said. It was sent from the military archives. Mark opened the box carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, a picture from his old unit during the war. He smiled as he recognized the faces, but what made him freeze was the note attached. "In memory of Captain Harris, always watching over his men." The picture had been found in a recovered military chest and mailed to surviving members of the unit. Mark stared at it for a long time. Captain Harris and the same man Lily had drawn in her picture months ago. The same man she had said was smiling over them. Mark felt chills run through him. He looked down at Rex, who was sitting quietly beside him, tail wagging slowly. Guess she really wasn't alone that day, he said softly. He placed the photo beside Lily's drawing above the fireplace. 2 pictures side by side, one from the past, one from the present. Together they told a story of courage, faith, and something bigger than both man and dog. As spring returned, Mark and Rex continued to live peacefully. The forest grew green again, filled with birds and sunshine. Every now and then Mark saw Lily and her family walking on the trail. She always ran ahead to hug Rex first. They would sit by the river, throwing sticks and watching the water flow. Years later, when people in town spoke of Mark and Rex, they didn't just talk about the rescue. They talked about the bond between them. About how a man who had once lived in silence found his voice again because of a dog's heart, and how one small act of courage rippled through so many lives. One summer evening, as the sun painted the sky orange, Mark stood by the porch with Rex lying beside him. The old soldier smiled softly and said, "You know, buddy, I think we were meant to find her that day. Maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was destiny." Rex wagged his tail slowly, his eyes calm and wise. Mark chuckled. "Yeah," he said. "I like to think someone up there made sure our paths crossed." The forest was quiet, peaceful and full of life. For the first time in years, Mark felt completely at home. He realized that sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through the gentle heartbeat of a loyal dog and the smile of a child who got a second chance at life. And in that quiet cabin surrounded by woods, a soldier and his canine partner found what they had both been missing all along: peace.